In part 4 of Introduction to Synthesizers, the synthesis methods that I'm going to look at are additive, subtractive and Fourier synthesis. The SK1 that was produced by Casio, which we saw in the sampling section, also has a Fourier additive process which constructs the sound by adding sine waves together, I think in 8 or 16 different volume steps. So this will produce various different tones. They all end up sounding a little bit like an organ, and in a sense it's a little bit like the organ stops that used to be on old organs. And this allows the various different pitches, the different foot pitches of the pipes to be introduced at various different volume levels, and that constructs a different tone. So this is what the SK1 sounds like from its basic sound synthesizing tone. And when you add in the 8-foot pitch from the 16 one, you get, and going up the other footages we go, as maybe you can hear from those tones, they all sound vaguely in the same vicinity, sounding much like organs. I've actually applied one of the envelope characteristics to shape the volume of the sound using one of the tones that's been synthesized using this additive method. And this is what it sounds like. So it still sounds vaguely like an organ, depending on how you envelope shape it. And in this particular case, the SK1 doesn't do a particularly brilliant job at creating tones using this additive method. But in principle, you can make quite complex tones using the additive method. And usually this is used in combination with some kind of subtractive method like a filter, so that particular frequencies will be removed from the tone that you've created, and this will give it some kind of dynamics as it moves through the envelope. In the SK1 case, there's only volume envelope, there's no filtering characteristic, so there's no way to actually introduce those dynamics. The Fourier method itself is actually a mathematical technique, and this can be used in reverse to analyze a given tone and reduce it into its basic components. This, in principle, could be used to reconstruct a sample using only the Fourier coefficients, which would use a hell of a lot less memory than actually storing it in binary encoded form. So there's scope there for storing the sound using an algorithmic process. To demonstrate subtractive synthesis, I've plugged in the HT700 keyboard, which really is a DCO keyboard. It uses oscillators that have got various waveforms selectable, which are more complex than the basic square and triangle waveforms. It's actually listed as a pulse code modulation keyboard, so harking back to the previous episodes we're talking about PCM, but it has actually got an analog filter on it, and this is one of the sounds that I've created and stored in its memory banks. And we can hear the filter operating on that. And if I actually change the cutoff frequency, we'll get a different sound. And that's the effect of the filter cutting out some of the frequencies in the sound. I'll just play a chord on this and then open up the filter again, and we can see that there are extra harmonics when the filter is open, and that's the effect of subtractive synthesis, as it takes out some of the harmonics that have been introduced by whichever synthesis method has been used, and that is what shapes the sound dynamically, the timbre, over time by taking out some of those harmonics, and that creates that characteristic piaum sound which you can hear on that keyboard. I have another example of subtractive synthesis. I'm going to use a DX100 breath controller through MIDI to control a DGX2, and this can control a filtering effect within the DGX2. This is one clever technique you can actually exploit using the external controllers to give you more control over a DGX2, and this is what that sounds like. So we can hear that's quite a sophisticated sound. And that's really all I want to say about additive and subtractive synthesis. We'll come back to filters later on in their own section in modulation and control elements. In part 5 we'll be looking at some of the other synthesis methods, which are phase distortion, FM and linear arithmetic. The phase distortion method is favoured by Casio's CZ series. FM is Yamaha's innovation, which produces sound by modulating carrier frequencies, and the linear arithmetic method is Roland's D series keyboards, and so we'll look at those next.